So I think we all can agree that Pokemon's a trash fire at this point. At least that's what the internet would lead you to believe if you looked on Twitter for 5 minutes.
I'm so happy they didn't just remake Diamond and Pearl and the Sword and Shield engine and call it a day. Give me more stylized Pokemon. This reminds me of Link's Awakening remake. I like this. You do you, man.
Oh, for the love of you little shit!
Pokemon is no stranger to being a bit of a punching bag and getting legit criticism, and hey, there are those who do make legit criticisms, but there are those who are just willing to just dump on others because they dared voice any sort of positivity towards the series nowadays. Like, I'm all for criticizing Game Freak, and that's the purpose of this video, but dumping on other people's opinions like that over a game, just because they're being positive, yeah, sure, makes me really want to sub to ya, boys and girls. Seriously, legit being serious, the Pokemon fanbase is so appalling to me now, and people think that it's just the Sword and Shield defenders, and at the same time that people think it's the Sword and Shield critics that make me hate it. But it's both sides that make me distance myself from interacting with the fanbase as a whole, so don't give me that BS. Both sides are annoying. Ranting aside, you didn't come here to see the bleak dark hole that is Pokemon's fanbase, you're here to see me rant about the bleak dark hole of the Pokemon's Gen 4 remakes. Hooray! Either that or the thumbnail tantalized you. I don't know, that usually tends to happen. Look, let's get this out of the way. I don't care about the graphics of the games. Graphics aren't a hard sell for me, so as long as the game isn't bugging out, I'll play the games. Now, to me, there are bigger concerns with the Gen 4 remix that should be addressed, and things that people who are supposedly care about Pokemon don't want to talk about. All they care about is graphics. And I get it, remakes tend to hone in on the style of the generation they're in, but considering all the discourse around the graphics of Sword and Shield, let me just say I don't really blame the developers for not going with them. But let's get this going before people start leaving comments saying, "Video starts at insert time frame." So having played Pokemon Platinum recently, there's something that you should all know about the Gen 4 games, and that's that they are known to be the slowest titles in the series. That's mainly due to the fact that on the original DS there was more of a focus on adding 3D graphics to the overall to make the games pop out more, and the games do look great. However, Diamond and Pearl had very low frame rates. There was a delay between actions, like between a Pokemon being hit by an attack and its HP being depleted. There's also a slow rate of high HP Pokemon bars slowing as you just sat through. Their surfing speed felt like a crawl. Platinum and Heart Gold Soul Silver kinda fixed these issues as the surfing speed was up and there was a slight fix to the HP draining aspect, but they're still slow, at least especially compared to Gen 5 that came out on the same console. Obviously, and I would hope that the optimization for the games now would have these aspects not be a problem, so that you wouldn't have to wait so long for a Pokemon to faint. Granted, I don't think that's too much of an issue in today's Pokemon, but considering that the games have been touted as Gen 4 experience, well, yeah, there's a little bit of concern. Especially when you watch the trailer, you'll notice that there aren't any actual HP bars shown throughout it. Weird, huh? Granted, that wasn't the only thing that slowed down the game's original pacing, and this is something that should be removed from the games entirely or at least retooled. And that's the HMs. We don't need a return of HMs in the Pokemon games. Most of the moves tended to be insanely weak, most of them are normal type attacks, and of course you would hold back some people from actually using their desired team since most of the time you'd be lugging around an HM slave. Shine on, you brave Babarrel! Point is, there should be a system of abilities like in Sun and Moon where you don't need HMs in order to access areas and get stuff like the Poke Ride, or even take a page out of Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. Or, as another alternative, offer tools to the players they can get to across areas. Stuff like climbing gloves to get up the rocky paths, or having the surfing bike from Sword and Shield. Stuff like this should be implemented because HMs also ate up a ton of players' time because of the animations. Look, if I see a tree I want to cut down, you don't need to ask me to use cut and play the animation. I just want to cut the tree down. There has never been a situation where I cut a tree down in Pokemon and not regret it. Same thing with Rock Smash. Same thing with Rock Climb, same thing with Surf, and I think you get the idea. I understand that Game Freak is trying to go for the Diamond and Pearl experience, but by that same token, they should cut out the fluff in the game in that regard so people can enjoy the games. Luckily for me, and for a lot of people, just looking at the main page, we can see that there are some modern conveniences with the games. But hey, who knows? I remember the quote from Game Freak's developers talking about how they want players to get through the games quickly. Well, this is what they should be doing. Removing the unneeded tedium of the games, not the actual content that has sadly been messed with in previous titles. Speaking of... Pokemon games in the last few generations have been lacking in the main and post-game content, with the exception of playing in competitive battling. And I'm not knocking competitive battling, but Pokemon for a long time has a need for additional content for people to play as an RPG. Hell, looking towards the first remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, there was additional content in the form of the Sevi Islands, a number of islands in the game that allowed for more content than there was in the original Red and Blue. There were also updates to the gameplay, since they obviously had to include things like abilities, including the past Pokemon in games, and even including features like the Versus Seeker in order to challenge the Outer World trainers. And when we look towards the other remakes such as Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Auras, they brought more to the table when the story sections of the games. Granted, that can be both for positive and negatives with this, especially when you consider how an Auras, while having more stellar presentation with the story beats, had a lot of pauses in it as well. And let's not forget about the hand-holding, despite the fact that games open up with an obvious hook of nostalgia, meaning that people have played the previous incarnations of this story. Basically, what I'm aiming is that the game should take more of an approach to a combination of Platinum and Auras. Basically include the character scenes from Platinum, for example, Cyrus' speech to his grunts, having the whole Battle Frontier post-story, and maybe include the whole distortion role in the game as well, as akin to like the Delta episode. Only, you know, competently written. That'd actually be pretty neat to see on the big screen. Speaking of additions, what should also be included at the very least is the roster that Platinum had. Fun fact about Diamond and Pearl, there were only 2 fire-type lines that you could get in the entire main game. And one of those happened to be your starter Chimchar. So if you didn't choose the fiery monkey, well, you're only left with the fiery horse that couldn't really hit hard with its fire attacks. I do also hope that they change the gym leaders in Elite Four team rosters, the biggest problems being Volkner and Flint. They were a good portion of their teams weren't actually specialized for their types, and while that did add a bit of challenge, it wasn't done out of necessity to cover types. It was done because they literally had nothing else to work with. And this is a bit of a concern because if we look towards Auras, you'll see they used the same original formula for the Elite Four and gym leaders, most notably the champion Steven. Now, I like Steven, I think he's a great champion, probably one of my favorites. But you can easily mow his team over with a well-trained Blaziken, one of the starters. Yeah, it kinda makes the game a bit too easy to steamroll. And an Emerald? Well, basically, Blaziken couldn't take down most of the Elite Four on his own in an Auras with Mega Evolutions and Speed Boost? Ugh. Not helped is the broken EXP share that allow you to practically over-level all your Pokemon into beat sticks, as well as the EXP distribution. Personally, I'd prefer the use of the EXP method from Gen 5, since I feel that would be much more adequate to have a better paced combat RPG, especially with Pokemon. Include the Battle Frontier. Just include the Battle Frontier storyline. Don't tease it like you did with damn Auras. Do it, you sons of bit. Considering the whole issue of Sword and Shield and people still ranking on the games to this very day for some of its bad decisions,
that makes no sense at all.
I think the best thing to do is to have the ability to have the full national dex be available in the game. Quite possibly in the post-game, so it doesn't go, you know, broken. For me personally, I prefer to have a physical game cartridge or something akin to that to store my Pokemon on, rather than the cloud, where if I forgot to do something or failed to make a payment on time, and lose all the Pokemon I have in my cloud database. Because while I do understand the ideas behind wanting to keep the same games faithful to the originals, I also want there to be more to the games. After all, one of the biggest parts that I really enjoyed was the PAL Park. Allowing me to transfer from my advanced games into the DS games was a little fun treat that I could transfer up my Pokemon from Ruby and Sapphire and Leaf Green and add them to my Gen 4 games. If you're going to talk about traditional experiences from Pokemon Gen 4, then in my opinion you should allow the previous Pokemon, even from Gen 8, to show up in the remake titles. Also, side note, and this is kind of far-fetched, but I think the regional deck should also have the regional variants as well as the Sinnoh regional variants as well. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee support the Alolan variants, and Sword and Shield also support the Alolan variants as well. So by that logic, both the Galarian and Alolan variants should be present or compatible with the Sinnoh remakes. Pokemon in the Sinnoh Dex that has a regional variant: Ponyta and Rapidash, Mr. Mime, Raichu, Geodude, Graveler, and Golem, and this isn't even accounting for the Gen 4 National Dex. I think these types of Pokemon should be supported. In addition, I think there should be Sinnoh variants. Not only would it allow for more Pokemon to be introduced, as well as having expanding on the feature, much like how in Oros we got more Mega Evolutions as opposed to X and Y's with limited roster. Regional variants are arguably the most favorable modern addition to the Pokemon series. It brings new life into pre-existing Pokemon. Sun and Moon introduced the concept while Sword and Shield had regional variants of Pokemon gain new evolutions. With Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl being faithful recreations of Diamond and Pearl, regional variations are kind of unlikely. Although you still have to take into account the fairy typing, so it's still something that I wish would be expanded upon for upcoming games, and still fall in line since part of the charm of Gen 4 was brought on to attention, at least to me, would be the new evolutions that brought a ton of previously B-list Pokemon into a more competitive styling, or at the very least, allow for a new way to use the Pokemon. Oh, Frostlass, you're still number one in my book nowadays. So, here we are, again.
It's always such a pleasure. Remember when you tried to kill me twice?
I don't know what to say. I want to be optimistic with Pokemon, but nowadays I prefer to be more cautious than I would really want to be with the series. Still, here's hoping, and I want to hear what you guys think down below. Do you think my ideas would fly? Would you buy the games if these were implemented? Or what would you do to make the games more polished? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for listening. Have a great day.